Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Tigers Talk Rugby. Before we get started, if you're listening on Facebook and YouTube, we are on other podcasting platforms. These platforms include Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, and Spotify. So with that, I'm your host, Ethan Richards, as per usual, joined by
CJ Bakle.
And Beckett Rice.
And today we discuss the Autumn Nations. We're actually getting away from Super Rugby. We're getting away from Southern Hemisphere Rugby. We're actually going to talk about some Northern Hemisphere Rugby, something that we haven't done in a long time.
I'm so ready. I'm so happy.
Yeah, Ethan's kind of pumped about it.
Oh yeah, I did. When they announced the Autumn Nations, I was like, oh hell yeah, I get to see more Northern Hemisphere.
Last week, Ethan was like, you guys are doing a Southern Hemisphere team. I'll just back out of that one. So we missed you last week, but
yeah, it's good to be back.
Now you show up.
Oh,
of course, I heard Autumn Nations, and I was like, it was like the meme with like the my parents aren't home. It was like we're talking Northern Hemisphere Rugby, and I just like I'm on my way.
What? I'm on my way.
It's like the Drake meme. It's like Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere.
Oh yeah, exactly. So Beckett, you want to kick us off?
Start off. I can go over. Yeah, some basic information on the Autumn Nations. So it's going to involve 8 teams, the normal Six Nations, Ireland, Wales, England, Scotland, Italy, France, and then 2 newcomers, Georgia and Fiji. It was originally supposed to be Japan, but they backed out, and so then they got brought in Georgia to replace them. So they're split into 2 pools. There's Group A, England, Georgia, Ireland, Wales, and Group B, Fiji, France, Italy, and Scotland. The way it's going to work is each team is going to play all 3 teams in their pool once each week, and then at the end, based on the rankings within each pool, they're going to play their opposite. So whoever's bottom of Group A will play Italy. Whoever's top of Group A will play whoever's top of Group B, and so on. And it's going to go from the 13th of November to the 6th of December.
My birthday.
Yeah, that's the England game, so.
Oh yeah.
Happy birthday to you. We're watching England rugby.
I'm okay with it.
So I guess the first point I want to get to is Group of Death.
Group A.
Group A. You've got England, Ireland, and Wales.
Don't write off Georgia.
And tied in. I said tied in with Georgia.
I said don't write them off though. It could be number 1.
I look at this pool, and like this is death. Like you've got the 3 like probably hardest hitting, biggest international sides in the Northern Hemisphere in this pool. Like England, Ireland, Wales have been, in my opinion, dominating the Six Nations as a core for the last couple of years. And this group, I look at Georgia and I kind of fear for them in a way but at the same time, I look at them and I'm like, this is the team that has nothing to lose in this pool.
They're literally just out here to have fun. Let's be honest. Because we have COVID, and there was no international play going on really until now. And I don't know if any Georgia has if a lot of their players have been playing at all. I know they have a couple of guys who might play in the Premiership and whatnot.
They have 60-something guys who play in France. So
yes,
but you see where it's okay, some of these guys may or may not have been playing. So just to come back and play some international rugby is yes,
absolutely
playing rugby.
See, for me, I guess the only thing that they can look at to prove is that they deserve to be looked at and recognized as a team at the same level as Italy, if not better.
Yeah, no, because there's been a lot of talk in the last couple of years about maybe relegation, and the talk is usually between relegation, so they can come up and Italy can go down.
And obviously, the last time those two teams met, Italy came out with a victory, which kind of shows that they're not quite there for Georgia. But I would love, I kind of want to see Italy and Georgia to seed in the same spot for these last 4 games where they're doing the cross pool matchups. And I want to see Italy and Georgia play each other.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of a bit of a fan of Georgia rugby. You know, I really like some of the players they have, Mamuka Gogadze, Becca Gogadze. And I was actually watching a few weeks ago, the World Rugby did a little documentary about them, called Georgia Rugby's Next Superpower, and how it's the biggest sport there now. The last 20 years, they built 20 rugby specific stadiums, and so I think it's would be really interesting to see how they do in a tournament pretty much only tier 1 nations that they had to play, and see how they compete with that, because that's been sort of, I think, a goal they've been working towards, is to try and get into one of these bigger international tournaments aside from just the World Cup.
Yeah, and not gonna lie, this is kind of like a mini World Cup, let's be honest, because it is, it's a little bit of
I mean, you've got 8 of the teams that you've got an 8 of the teams that you will see in
again,
a World Cup. Yeah, you will see them again. So
and one of them is Fiji. Fiji's not really in the Northern Hemisphere, and they don't really play a lot of these teams pretty frequently. So having Fiji be over there, it's okay, a little bit of variety. And then, like you said, it shows that Georgia can. It's like a not a dress rehearsal, but kind of like a post World Cup. Okay, this is how good we are. This is how we've improved, even with COVID or since for previous years or whatever.
So that brings us. You mentioned Fiji and how it's kind of a shocking thing to see them in here. So I'm going to use that as a good segue to move us towards Group B, which is Fiji, France, Italy, and Scotland. And I look at this pool, if I'm Fiji, who comes into this tournament, who obviously plays these teams maybe once every 4 years, if they get placed in a World Cup pool with them, it's this is not a group of teams that they're consistently playing with against a group that play each other every year, know each other's strengths and weaknesses. If I'm Fiji, I would look at this and be oh, these are the teams that I wanted to get paired with for the Six Nations. Yeah. Italy, Scotland, because Scotland, even though they perform very well in a lot of their matchups, they just seem to fall short much more frequently than I think they should when watching their games. But
if you look at Fiji's last 4 wins against tier 1 nations, it's all France, Scotland, Italy twice, and if you go back even further to their last 10, it's 5 or 6 against Fiji, 2 against Scotland and France. So they do actually match up very well against these teams. I think this is a pool that they can really be a dark horse in.
Yeah, this pool is definitely is more anybody could win it. And it's not that it's the most even or consistent. I would think it's the most anybody could win it or be the number 1 team. Whereas with the other one, it's pretty consistent with England, Ireland, Wales, and then there's Georgia.
Yeah. I feel more with this one, if anything, this is the more inconsistent, because you know how France are and Scotland are sometimes.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I guess you're right.
I'm so excited to watch Group B more so than Group A, specifically because I can go into every single game knowing that whatever expectations and whatever perspective I have, I might have to throw out the window. And that's what I love to see. I love to see those levels of complexity and inconsistencies, but at a level where both teams are competitive. So this game, these games, I'm so excited for because it's so much more unknown. When I see an England-Ireland game, or I see an England-Wales game, or an Ireland-Wales game, I know for a fact the type of rugby I'm going to get out of them, the nose to the grindstone level force and pressure and hard work that those teams are going to put in. But when I see a France game or a Scotland game or even an Italy game, you can see these crazy moments brightness and insanity, awesome rugby, that like the next play ends up in like an awful missed tackle leading to just like a +1 try. And it's just like that level of inconsistency, I think, is so intriguing and makes Pool B like awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I think I think there's a lot more potential for an upset win in here with with Fiji being in here, being able to play these guys. I think it'll sort of show, depending on how they play, if how far out they are from being the next team behind Japan to be bumped up to tier 1 maybe.
Yeah, for sure.
I do feel, like I said, I'm a bit of a Georgia fan. I feel a little bad for them being in that pool, but I still feel like they're Georgia. They're tough. They're pretty tough. They're gonna still put up a good fight. I think. Hopefully their world-renowned scrum shows up and they can get a few nice tries in.
That would be awesome. I actually, that brings a good point. Moving back towards Group A and whatnot, I am so excited to see this Georgia scrum match up against like the English and the Irish.
Oh, absolutely.
Packs.
That's where I am actually. I think that maybe Georgia might not do as well with the scrum, because I know in the past Georgia and England tend to have joint training sessions together where they'll just practice only scrums.
Yeah.
So maybe England does really is able to overtake them in the scrum. Maybe they're not. Who knows? But in the World Cup, their scrum wasn't phenomenal. It wasn't like absolutely outstanding like what we would expect from them. So that's where I like maybe Georgia's world-renowned scrum might not be their saving grace. They might not be their little light on the end of the tunnel or whatever.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that goes. I mean, they do have a lot of props that play in France, and France is known for we want to scrum all day long. So we'll have to see how that goes. And like you did say, they at the last World Cup did not show up as we had thought they would. So it will be very interesting to see how they do this time around.
So shifting us specifically to talking about individual matchups and teams and the pools, I want to get to what your opinions are on the Six Nations teams having a couple games a couple weeks before this tournament, and how you think that'll impact this tournament specifically and how these teams play. CJ?
So I think the biggest part of or the biggest concern, I should say, for those Six Nations teams is the injury risk, especially now that some of these teams like the English, they've been playing, and the Welsh, they've been playing Premiership rugby for the last few weeks. So they've had a little bit of tiredness, a little bit of a little bit of wear and tear on their bodies for the last couple of weeks. And then they're going to go into international rugby, put more wear and tear on themselves and potentially get injured. And I guess they have like a 2-week period to kind of like rest and recover, but like how you can't really rest and recover, like a torn ACL or major injuries.
I could see the Six Nations teams maybe delving a little bit deeper into their depth chart to alleviate some pressure for their starters. For example, like Ireland and Italy have to play 2 games in the Six Nations because there's the last round and then Ireland and Italy got canceled. So Italy's going to play Ireland and England. So Ireland and England might, for those games, trot out a sort of lesser squad so that they can rest a little bit. And I think also with the fact that you have like Georgia and Italy and Fiji, although I'd be a little bit careful with Fiji, is maybe you could trot out a few players from your depth chart that haven't really gotten a lot of playing time but are still pretty good to, maybe alleviate some pressure from those boys. So for me, we could see more players being blooded in this.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I look at that set of games, and my attitude is like, okay, so these teams are getting a good warm up, a good practice. Like obviously, it's going to have a lot of weight behind it because it is still Six Nations games. But in terms of looking forward towards the Autumn Nations Cup, I think this really builds this background and this strength for these teams to get back up to that international level after the long COVID break. And you mentioned some of these players like going in, like playing in the Premiership and at the club level. Because of how many players keep getting rotated in and out, I'm not sure how much that specifically will have an impact. But I think you're right. Those players who play in the Six Nations games will have a little bit more in wear and tear, and they will need to be worried about risks, which is why Beckett's point of them playing a little bit lower and more depth in their charts for these Six Nations sides in those Six Nations games might be more beneficial to help them and prep them for this next tournament.
And who knows? Like maybe the extra, 2, 3, 4 weeks for these non-Six Nations teams. So Georgia and Fiji might prove to be, a little bit more rest and recovery period for those guys who've been playing. And they're able to, get into a right mindset, get some training, maybe a little bit underneath them, and then come out, swinging. Because we all saw with the Premiership that after the break, Premiership rugby is fantastic.
No, absolutely.
The style of play, the quality of play, everything was great. So maybe for them having a month off of just doing some like training or whatever, they can, maybe they'll come out just swinging.
Absolutely. I think that would be fantastic. That's what I would love to see.
And yeah, it's typical Fiji nature to be absolutely dramatic and be, flying all over the pitch with these wild offloads and just the speed and power that they can produce. So if they have that, if they're up to 100%, then some of these, Fiji or like France is going to France, Scotland, and Italy are going to be like, oh, we're playing
worried.
These guys. Not again.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, not
Speaking
these
of,
guys.
I cannot wait to see Semi Radradra play against these teams. I think he's been lighting it up in the Premiership.
Yeah, he's gonna abuse
really
the Italian
absolutely.
wings. I can guarantee you that one.
Oh yeah, I could see him being up for Player of the Tournament.
Wow, that's a early and quick call for it. But
I mean, when you're as good as he
is,
is, man,
it's true.
So, who do you guys think is gonna win Group A?
So
Or be the top of Group A, I should say. Be the top.
I think it's
Ethan, you're
tough.
last.
First.
Ethan's last because we already know what he's picking.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I might as well
CJ
get it
will
over
go
with,
first.
right? No.
So let me go first then in that case. So I think I'm gonna start from the bottom. Bottom's gonna be Georgia. I don't think they're gonna win any games. I think they'll put up a good fight. It's still gonna be entertaining games because they'll put up a fight like they normally do. But I just think they're not at the level that they hopefully will be in years to come to get their first tier 1 nation win. After that, I'd probably have to go. It's going to be it's close, but I'd say Wales would finish third. In the Six Nations before you got discontinued, they weren't looking quite right. They just they're under a new coach, so they're still learning a new scheme. Maybe with the last week of the Six Nations, it'll help them find their groove. But I could see them, finishing behind Ireland and England. And then it's really close for the first and second spot, but I might have to go England just edging out Ireland. I feel like that'll be a pretty close game when they play in the third week, I think.
Yes.
Or the second week. But I think England will just, they'll come out on top. They were the second place team in the World Cup. Saracens did just beat Leinster, and Leinster and Saracens, are known for holding the bulk of their two international teams. So That's what I'm going is England, Ireland, Wales, and then Georgia.
So I'm gonna cut you off, CJ, because I want to go ahead and say that mine is the exact same as Beckett's.
Well, I was gonna say mine's the exact same as Beckett's as well.
Okay, wow.
Okay, awesome. So we're all in agreement that England is the best team in Group A already. I'm just gonna.
But I will say, Ireland is going to give them. Ireland is going to give them the hardest time. They're going to get. If anybody's going to able to scare them, it's going to be Ireland. I don't know about you guys, but I read a story about Jonathan Sexton. Did you see that? So he didn't start the Pro 14 final, and when he got the news that he wasn't starting, he apparently grabbed like a coffee cup and just like threw it at the wall right behind his coach. That's how mad he was. And when he came off the bench, he was playing with like absolute passion against Ulster. Even though Ulster really didn't have they had that one try early on, but they didn't have any they didn't have a chance. So I think Jonathan Sexton is probably going to be the one thing that's going to put him over or put them over.
I think the big thing is that both Ireland and Wales in their matchups against England during this earlier this year in February, March era, when we were allowed to play sports before COVID, they both England beat them both, which is why I think both of these teams in this pool are going to be their main goal is going to be vengeance.
Yeah.
And for Wales, it's going to be a revenge tour because they lost both to Ireland and to England in this previous Six Nations. And so they're going to turn to this. They're going to look at this and be like, all right, if we beat both these teams, like we can say screw it to this last Six Nations. If we win now, like we can be happy with that, you know? So I think out of those three teams, like when you pick that order, like it's such a close like selection that any outcome I would not be shocked by, other than Georgia being above all of them.
Yeah.
So
I mean, Wales and England is always a grudge match, so we're going to see how that goes.
For sure.
All right, let's segue into Group B. Lads, what's your predictions? I know it's kind of tough. This one will be a little bit more tough.
Okay, so, I'll go ahead and go first because Beckett can go first. So, for me, I think France is going to top this pool. I think they've got the depth. They've got the strength. Well, they've got the strength, not necessarily the depth, actually. They've got a lot of strength and a lot of talent in their, especially their starting 15, very traditionally has been for a while. Usually they struggle when you start pulling in those 23. But against a team like Italy and against teams like Scotland, I think that they can hold their own in those last 20 minutes of a game, 30 minutes of a game. So I put France at the top. Then I have Fiji, because seeing how they performed in their last matchups against these other three teams, as Beckett was saying, where they have come out on top of all three of these teams, Italy twice, I would not be surprised to see them play second. And I'm so excited to see this team play again. And then I have Scotland and then Italy in last.
Okay. Mine's pretty similar. The only difference I have is I put Italy number 1. No, I'm kidding. I put Fiji over France, actually, and then Scotland and Italy and say yes.
Well, that's an interesting
I feel like Fiji they have the talent to be able to cause another upset to France. I feel like, you know, everyone says, you know, France is the most inconsistent team in world rugby. So we're not really sure what team's going to be there. If it's the team that was playing in this Six Nations, or if it's the team that was playing in this Six Nations and lost to Scotland. But I feel like it'll be a really close match, but Fiji will just edge them out and come out on top, and then be playing England for the week of the finals.
So the one thing I think France is the most underrated right now, and I don't know for what reason, is their youth. So their U20 team consistent U20 World Cup winners, right? They'll edge out New Zealand every single time. So their youth and those younger lads on their team, I think, could provide the depth and consistency that they need. Is it going to happen this tournament? Who knows? But for me, I think, France is probably going to be number one, similar to Ethan. I'm actually going to say Scotland at number two, because I think Fiji, they might come out talented, but something tells me that they might not come out as, like, schemed, or if you know what I mean. It's going to be kind of like they're going to be running around just kind of throwing the ball around, not really having a set pattern or anything like that. So I feel as if, like, Scotland could edge them out with that one. And then Italy is going to be last place. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to the Italians.
I gotta respect your flip with Fiji and Scotland, because that's probably the hardest debate for me is which one of them will beat the other in their matchup. The reason why I have Fiji isn't necessarily because they're unschemed, but I think Scotland makes enough mistakes that Fiji can successfully punish them for. And so, and on the other side of the coin, though, if a true Scottish defense shows up to that game and it is a rainy, grubby, gross environment, cold, like, tough game, Scotland will 100% edge Fiji out, as that is their environment, because that game is going to be played in Edinburgh. That game will be a home game with their home weather and their home environment. So I just think if they make those mistakes that you've seen them make in previous games, I think the game goes to.
Yeah. And the only other thing I could counter your argument with potentially the Fiji going over and the mistakes, is that some of these guys, from Scotland, they've been playing in the Pro 14 with Glasgow, with Edinburgh. So some of these guys have already been playing with some of their teammates.
That's true.
Maybe they, so maybe there isn't really that, like, oh, we're getting back into it, trying to shake off some rust. These guys have already shaken off that rust. And then on top of that, with the finishing off the Six Nations, maybe they go into it just guns a-blazing. But
yeah. I also want to point out what usually hurts Fiji is they sort of run into some indiscipline and they get carded. They gave away stupid penalties. They've now brought in former international referee Glenn Jackson to be an assistant coach for them. So maybe he's going to be. I think he's there to, like, teach them what the referee's looking at and looking for and stuff, and so they can get away from some of those.
Discipline. Yeah.
So we could see a more disciplined Fiji than we have. And I think if we do, that's really going to help them when they're playing Scotland and France.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a perfect way to wrap up the episode. Before we go, I would like to say thank you for all of our listeners. Please go check us out on Spotify, check us out on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcast. See if we're on there. If we're not, reach out. We will do our best to get ourselves on that platform as well.
And to add to Ethan too, we'd also like to, say thank you to anybody who, supports the podcast and is a subscriber on Anchor. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll post later on, or we'll sometimes post links to our Anchor, and you could donate, $1, $5, or like $10 a month to this podcast to help us out. So
yeah, we really want to expand what we're doing. We want to kind of get better sound quality, better audio quality. We want to be able to reach out to bigger names and whatnot. So anything that you could do to help would help us. Like, we would really appreciate it. We'd love it, because then we can bring better and more amazing content to you. So with that, this was another episode of Tigers Talk Rugby. Thank you for listening.
Go watch the rugby.
There it is.
Yeah.